All right, so you have written and recorded the perfect song. You are ready to get it mixed and mastered by a professional. You've done everything you can to it, and you know that you're ready to take it up another notch. So you are going to send it to someone to mix and master. Maybe you're sending it to me. It doesn't matter. Point is, you've got a lot of questions. How do you need the files? Do you want the whole session? Do you want just the WAV files? Do you want my effects and my plugins? Do you want me to mute them, get rid of them? How do you want it? Well, let's answer those questions today. How to prepare your session or your project for someone else to mix. So like I said in the intro, I get this question a lot. What do you need me to do? How do you need to receive these files? Man, there's a lot of ways to go about doing this. Some are definitely more helpful than others. It's up to you to judge whether something is right or wrong. It depends on the relationship that you have with the mix engineer. So I will just caveat that. Always, always, always keep an open conversation going with the engineer. Make sure to share your expectations. Make sure to listen to him or her on what they're expecting and what they're needing. And I think this whole process will go a lot smoother. So with that being covered, let's dive into figuring out what you need to do to prep your song. Now, I was just talking to someone today, Andy Brown, who's working on a song. He's just about finished, and he's going to send it to me to mix and master, and he's got all these questions, and they're perfectly fine and normal questions. And so I'm going to kind of go through those, and we'll walk through all of those things, all those questions together. So here's what Andy started in reaching out to me. He says, "Hey, I have a song that I would love to be mixed and mastered properly. I've got the music down, just waiting on some vocals. Would like to hear from you regarding the process, how to send the file. Currently I have it in Cubase 10.5 artist project." He actually says, "But I understand that I'll probably need to bounce the audio before sending. So what should I do on my end before sending? Should I gain stage? Should I add effects, plugins? Should I do a light mix? Etc. Looking forward to your reply." So I replied, I said, "No EQ or compression on any is preferred. For effects, only print what you're absolutely married to. It's preferable to have you do a rough mix and bounce that as a stereo wave as a reference for me." You've been living and breathing this song for a long time, so you're going to want to have a rough mix for the mix engineer just to get an idea of what it is that you have. But you need to not be totally married to that rough mix. There's nothing worse than having a rough mix that you really like and then sending it to someone, and then they do what they think is right, and then you're never quite happy with it because you always prefer your rough mix for whatever reason. Well, then that engineer's not doing anything for you. Why'd you bother to send the song? Just keep your rough mix. But if you know that it's only as good as you can get it, and you know that it can be better, then at least give the reference mix, but don't be so married to it and don't get so used to it that you're not open to new ideas from the engineer. So in just a minute, we'll go further into this email chain between me and Andy. But let's start with where I just said no EQ, no compression is preferred. Okay, so hop on here to Pro Tools. This is a song, if you've watched the Mix and Album from Start to Finish series, this is one of the songs on there. It's called Without You. It's me on drums and guitar and vocals and everything. So here is the song. These are the drums. It goes all the way down to a loop. I've got reverbs. I've got slam bus. I've got a drum bus. I've got all this stuff. And 2 basses, bass synth. Okay, so first things first, this is what I did, and this is important before you start doing anything. Let's just say this is your session, and you're happy with it. Well, don't start editing your session. Save a copy in a different location. Save copy as, I'm not sure how all the different DAWs call it. In Pro Tools, I can save a copy. I know that I can do the same thing in Logic. So I had the song called, the session was called Without You - Joe Sidoti, whatever. I've called this one, Without You, Joe Sidoti, 2448-Mix Prep. Okay, this is the session that I'm prepping to be mixed by someone. That naming just helps keep it straight. Which version is this? And then when and if, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, you're going to send the entire project or the entire session, which I still don't recommend. But if you're dealing with someone who you have a real tight connection with, you know that they have the same DAW that you're using, you know that they have the same plugins that you're using, and you want to go ahead and roll the dice and send the entire session, you at least need to make sure that they know that it's named, properly. So, and if not, I like to just put the 2448, or if it's 16-bit 44.1 or 96K, whatever it is, I like to put that in there so there's just no confusion as to what the bit depth and the sample rate are. That's just an extra little thing. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is save as, which I have done, so we're going to skip that for video's sake. And so this is now Without You -Joe Sidoti -2448-Mix Prep. And here's all my tracks, and they're all cut up and all over the place, and we're going to go over all of that. I'm literally going to come, I don't even care what's on here. On my drums, I've got console 1. I'm going to remove all the plugins from my drums. So I'm going to come all the way here up to the drum loop, and I'm going to say Alt-Shift, no insert. For whatever reason, that one didn't work. Okay, no insert. Now, there's still sends. I'm still sending them to the slam bus. I'm still sending to snare effects, reverbs, and things like that. So currently now, this kick drum file, well, let me get rid of groups. This kick drum file has no plugins, but it is being sent to the slam bus. Here's my slam bus. Are you ready? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to completely just delete slam bus. I'm going to delete the drum bus and all that processing that's on there. I want my engineer's opinion of what he thinks, if it needs to have a slam bus, and if so, what does it need to sound like, and what kind of processing needs to be on the drum bus. I want him to decide. So I'm going to get rid of all of the sends on the drums. Let's do that. Come down here, shift click, and I'm going to say no sends on A, no sends on B. So the question then is, we're talking about getting rid of some processing. What about my drum verb? How married to it am I? Well, I like it, but what if there's room for improvement? I don't know. So in this case, I'm not even going to keep the snare verb. I'm going to delete it. It's gone. Now let's move on. And bass DI, all that, let's just do this quickly. I don't need to keep anything there. Synth bass, I don't need to keep any of that. This is all just EQ and compression. None of this is virtual instruments. None of this is melodined or auto-tuned. It was at one point, but I committed that and I got rid of the other tracks. They're actually hidden over in the old tracks list there, but I just pretend like those don't exist anymore. So I'm just going to come and I'm going to hold Option and say no insert on A, no insert on B, no insert on C. I'm just getting rid of it all. Let's say no insert on D and E. Okay, so that is half the battle right there. So let's move on into the email and we'll keep talking. So let's next talk about the fact that he says, hey, I know I'm going to probably have to bounce these as just audio files. So what do you need to do? The fact of this WAV file here doesn't start until 1:57 into the song. If I were to export these files as they sit, and that file comes into your engineer's folder, he doesn't know where that's supposed to go. There could be timestamps and there's all this sort of stuff, but you just don't want to rely on it. You want to make sure that every file starts at 0 and goes as long as it needs to. I like to just go ahead and do the whole length of the song just because it looks uniform, but you don't need to do that. But it certainly needs to start at 0 and doesn't end until you want it to end. But before we do that, this is what I'm going to recommend that you do. I'm going to recommend you clean up any fades, things like that. So he says it has quite a few tracks with automation and fade outs. If I send you my project without the automation, how will you know where to automate? He goes on and says, just to be clear, the file I send you, whilst being semi-mixed, is it supposed to have like minimum effects like reverb? Should it be a blank canvas? What about gain staging? These are all questions that are important. When it comes to automation, you want to make sure that you don't have any automation that is just simple volume rights. Okay? That's the whole point of someone else mixing your song, is let them decide how loud the strings should be on the verse versus the chorus. Let them decide how loud the bass needs to be on this part, or whether the snare needs to come up right here or not. Other than that, I wouldn't include any of that. Here's an example of when you might want to keep automation in. Say you've got an audio file, and on this part of the song you want it to go left, and on this part of the song you want it to go right. Well, maybe go ahead and automate that so that when it gets rendered out as a stereo file, it will be left and then right. And so that might be important to you. But when it comes to simple volume automations, I would not include them. I'm going to hold Option and click everything I have over to volume. I'm just going to go through and make sure, as I scroll, there is no volume automation. What would volume automation look like? Well, here, let's draw some in real quick and just go, okay, this thing's going like here and there and there, and this one's here, and then it drops out here, and then it comes back up here, and it does this. Okay. If you see that, that would be volume automation. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying, oh, here is a little volume automation. The motif guitar goes up at the end. Perfect. Oh, because my groups are, there we go, disabled. So it's just select all. Here's a little dot back here. That means that is going to set the volume of the synth lead. See, I didn't catch that. So I come all the way out here and make sure that there's nothing that I'm looking for. Nothing that I see, and then I'm going to select all of that and hit delete. Now there is no volume automation on my song, and I'll switch my view back to waveform just because I don't like that view. Alright, I had some technical difficulties. I don't know why. I had to restart my computer. God knows why. So what I did while off camera was I set all the faders at 0, just so that it's clean and I can know that, okay, if I want to solo something, I can hear it really well. Other than that, we should be good. So getting right into it, apologies for that, is the beginnings and the ends of files. So I want to just clean that up. Now, if I were to play this for you right now, it would sound really bad because all the faders are at 0. So it's no longer mixed, but I'm going to go ahead and just solo stuff that I need, want you to hear. So I'm going to just listen for the bass and make sure there's nothing dirty here that I want to clean up. So that's super clean, but here's what I'm going to do just in case. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do a quick little fade in. Okay, that ensures me that nothing is going to surprise me later. There's going to be no clicks and pops and ticks and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to come to the end and listen. Leave it as long as I can so it's right about there. And on this case, I'm not going to fade it out. I want the engineer to decide how long that fade should be. So Command S, save. Let's start. I really should have started at the drums, but let's see. So the drums are really clean at the beginning, so I'm just going to trim them up just a hair, just to make sure that there's nothing at that beginning. And here's a pro tip. Did you know that if you double click with the fade tool, it will add a tiny fade in? Look at that. Boom. Just by double clicking. That's Pro Tools. And then the end, I'll listen. I'm just going to do the same thing, just a quick little fade at the end. And then I'm going to just move on. I think you get the idea. So I'm not going to bore you with this, but I'm going to go through each track, and I'm going to listen if I need to delete or fade in or fade out, just to get the track clean, okay? As well as in between. If there's noise in between a take, then I'm going to clean that up too. So stand by. I'll be back. Okay, that took a while. I have all my files chopped up. I mean, you got to go in with these vocals, and if there's breaths you don't want, if there's S's you don't want, if there's rustling of lyric sheets, between words, you really got to go in there and just clean that up. The last thing that a mix engineer wants to do is have to take off his creative mix hat and put on his editor hat and really spend a whole bunch of time cleaning up stuff. One, they really will probably charge you more if there's excessive editing needed. And two, it's just, man, it's talk about just derailing from the creative process. So make sure that you're taking the time to give only the best, cleanest possible track that you can. You want them to just be able to start throwing up faders and not think about anything else but the mix. So that's just an insider's tip there. Okay, all of the stuff has been edited and faded in and out, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete all the other tracks that I don't need, like the reverb and the delays and the VCAs, and I had another song in here that was for reference for me. So now what I've got is just audio tracks. I don't have any aux tracks. I don't have any instrument tracks. Oh, there's a guitar bus. Let's delete that. And that's it. And let me go to all. Sorry. And highlight that. Now, every track is highlighted even beyond the point where there's actually, a waveform. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit these. Now I'll show you, I believe it's under Edit, Consolidate Clip, right? So it's Alt-Shift-3. So Alt-Shift-3, and it's going to render each of these tracks as a new WAV file. They're now highlighted here. Got to deselect. So now I want to select unused, Command-Shift-U. Those are the ones we're not using, and then I want to clear those. And for me, I'm just gonna delete. Yep, hold Option and hit yes, and it won't ask you a bunch of times. Now that's weird. There's still a bunch of weird files in here that aren't these. So why is that? So when I select all those, there's all those. So what are all these other files? It's still stuff pertaining to things that are just hidden. So Pro Tools isn't going to delete files. It thinks it's being used. Just because it's hidden doesn't mean you won't want to use it later. So it's protecting you from actually deleting something. So let's go into here and show only inactive tracks. Okay, these are all my tracks that are inactive. These are the original verses, choruses, that, as you can see here, hopefully, that I have Melodyne on, and that's why those are there. So I'm going to select, and this was a Q mix I did for myself. I'm going to select all those, and remember, this is a copy, so I'm not deleting stuff. I still have the original version in my mix. This is my mix prep. So I'm going to delete all these tracks. And now I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to show all tracks, which would be the 43 tracks that this song has. Some of those are stereo tracks, so there's a lot more than 43 audio files. But nevertheless, now let's deselect and let's select. Now we're going to clear Command-Shift-U, select unused regions, Command-Shift-B, and let's delete those. Now we only have our files. So the last step we're going to take before we export these is we're going to make sure that each of these files are named something that makes sense for the other person. Certainly, you don't want a bunch of audio 1s and audio 2s and audio 01.1.L.R. That's confusing. They need to know exactly what this is. So it's not about the track at this point. It's about the WAV file's name, the actual name of the file. I think the easiest way to do this is to go ahead and export these files into a folder and then rename the files in that folder. And here's why I think that. Because sometimes, and this is probably the case in this time, Pro Tools still likes to keep certain files in the audio folder, even though you told it delete, you told it get rid of, but for whatever reason, some of them still stick around. And so just to be safe, I'm just going to have all of these selected, and I'm going to export clips as files. Okay? I'm going to export them as WAV interleaved 24-bit 48K. Now, if I don't do interleaved, then it'll be a .L for a left and a .R for a right. Depending on what you want, that can be helpful. Now, when it comes to a mono file, it should just be a mono file, but when it's a stereo file, for instance, the snare sample here, it will actually render out a stereo file. So things that you know that you want stereo, you want to go ahead and make them stereo. But you got to make sure that if there's something that you want pan left and the other thing pan right, or at least that's how it was intended, then go ahead and call that track that thing. Octave left, octave right, telly left, telly right. You get the point. So I'm going to choose the folder. And just for argument's sake, let's put it on the desktop. And we're going to create a new folder. And we're going to call this without -U Joe Sidoti 2448 raw, and that's where we're going to export those files and export. Okay, now all we have to do is go to that folder, rename the files, and I'll show you kind of just what it's going to look like when the mix engineer brings them in. But for now, I'm going to quit Pro Tools and I'm going to go to the folder. Okay, here's we're looking at the folder. One thing to notice, some of these are exactly 25.2 megabytes and some of them are 50.5. Why is that? Well, now remember, they're all the same length. So every file should be the exact same length. But the stereo ones are double the information. So the B3 was stereo, so it's 50 megabytes. What else? The octave was stereo, and the synth bass was stereo. The synth lead was stereo. Here's what's funny about the way Pro Tools works is because I had the file called left and right, it put the telly into a stereo file. So now you're guaranteed to have your tellies be left and right. Now, if the engineer wants to split and make them into mono, they can. Or if you don't want to do that, then when you're exporting, you would just, instead of choose interleaved, you would choose multiple mono. And it would create a .L and a .R for anything like that that's stereo. I chose interleaved, and so that's why it did it that way. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to rename these. Oops, I don't want to open it. Okay, now that that's done, I've got them all named and ready to be sent to the engineer. So let's pretend, first of all, never send a folder with a bunch of files in the folder when you're using Dropbox or Google or whatever. You always want to archive it. You want to zip it. So you would just do that by right-click and say compress. Okay, but for the sake of this, we won't do that. Let's create a new session real quick. We're going to bring these in as if now we're the engineer who's going to be mixing it, and let's see what we got. Let's create a new session, and we're just going to call this Joe Sidoti Song 1. Right, just completely. And now I've communicated with the artist. I know that these files are 24-bit 48K because I checked, right? I mean, you can just simply Command-I, get info, and you can see that it's 24-bit 48K. Okay, awesome. So obviously I want my session to match. I don't want to do any up or down scales. I can choose interleaved. I can choose not. I'm going to go ahead in this case. I'm going to. There's no right or wrong way to do that. It's just, again, it's going to split into dual mono as opposed to being interleaved. Most DAWs nowadays work with interleaved folder files. Pro Tools used to not handle them so great. It used to always have to split into mono, but it's pretty much okay to do it. So let's say create, and just for funsies, we'll put this on the desktop and we'll call it Joe Sidoti Song 1. Okay. So now that we have Joe Sidoti Song 1, we've got an empty session here. And we want to import some audio. So File, Import, Audio. And let's go to our desktop, and without URAW, we're going to select all of those and add all and hit done. Do we want them in new tracks or just the clip list? Well, let's do it in new tracks right at the session start. Okay. Now they're going to come in alphabetically ordered, or how they were selected, I'm not sure. So they're not going to necessarily be in the order that you want to mix them in, but that's easy. Now you can just drag them around and the engineer can put them in whatever preference that they want. This won't be a mix, but everything's in sync. It's a wonderful thing. Now the engineer is free to start mixing and doing whatever they want. So, one last thing. If you're going to do the whole share the whole session with someone, you really got to communicate. I can't over communicate that enough. Talk to the engineer, find out what they prefer, find out what plugins, if you're going to leave plugins in, you know, I just talk to them. I think it's better to just receive raw. Most engineers would probably say that they would rather have just raw files, but the most important thing is that they're clean, that they're for the most part edited, nothing is clipping and distorting, and everything is aligned and in sync. Now, the last thing that Andy and I talked about was that gain staging. So for instance, I can now just come and I can turn down this motif guitar a little bit if I want. for my preference of how hot I'm going to hit my converters, my plugins, and things like that. So long as it's not clipping, you kind of don't need to worry too much about the gain staging. The engineer's going to do that themselves for the most part. So that's how I recommend that you deliver your files. If I missed a step, and I'm kind of scatterbrained today, so if I did, then let me know in the comments, or ask the question. If you're not sure, if I wasn't clear about something, ask questions. I'd love to see what it is that you guys are wanting to figure out, and I'll be happy to help you. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next video. If you like this video, then click that like button, I appreciate it, and subscribe to the channel and help support Sidoti Sound, and click that bell if you want to be notified when I release new videos. And of course, you can find me on all sorts of social media, so be sure to check that out. If you'd like to work with me on an upcoming project, then make sure to visit SidotiSound.com for more information. All right, guys, thanks a lot.